So this topic is a topic, but let's address it from the way it should be addressed, which is sources. Just to talk about God needs us, God needs us, how do we know? So everything is in Torah. Let us now go to the Chassidic question, which is, does God need us? I've heard some rabbis say that God needs us, while other rabbis vehemently disagree, arguing that this statement is sacrilegious. Can you please clarify the issue? So let me share a story that happened with myself, and then we'll clarify as best to my ability. A number of years ago, I was invited to a seminar on affluence and religion. And different rabbis, distinguished rabbis, were invited to Cambridge University. And we all delivered our papers. And then there was one prominent rabbi that was asked to conclude, say some inspiring words, and he did, and he talked a lot about, does God need us? Yes, how much God needs us. There was another one of the rabbis, without mentioning names, who felt it was his role to rebut this rabbi, because when we delivered the papers, that's what you did. You delivered a paper, then there were either the advisors or the listeners or others that were able to ask questions and challenge. That's how it's done in these type of seminars. So here he went and began to rebut and say that God doesn't need, God is complete in every perfect way. The concept of God needing us is psychobabble. It doesn't make any sense, not from a Maimonidean point of view, not from a Torah point of view. God doesn't need anything. We need God. God doesn't need us. That was the gist of it. The moderator felt that the second rabbi had somewhat humiliated the first rabbi who had said God needs us. So he said, he writes me a note. He wants me to weigh in and rebut the rebutter. I wrote back to him, why are you giving me this great honor? Why don't you do it? Just give someone else. He says, you can do a good job. Fine. Well, before I knew it, he after he finished, the rebutter finished, he gave me the mic. You press a button, like the red light goes on, or whatever it is, that gives you now the floor. So I said the following. I said, I'm not perhaps a great professor or scholar as the other rabbi, but I will say that this is a classic disagreement in Torah. You have a concept called Aveda Tzerech Geveya. Aveda Tzerech Geveya means that Aveda, Avadatem es Hashem Elokeichem, the service that we do, Aveda, the service that we Jews do, we humans do, Tzerech Geveya is not just Tzerech Hedyet, it's not just for us, for the good of people, but it's also Tzerech Geveya, good for Geveya, for heaven itself. I'll soon cite the sources, and there are two opinions on the matter. As a matter of fact, there are entire discussions on it. So why are we going into a whole debate? Just quote those things, and clearly there are those that there are rabbis and there are sages that clearly say yes, Aveda Tzerech Geveya, and they prove it with many different chazal. God needs us. You may need to explain what it means, but it definitely says so. Then there are others and other places that indicate that God is not, that God is indifferent, and is not affected by our actions. Anyway, afterwards, the rabbi that rebutted the first rabbi came over to me, and I said, and more than that, I cited the sources, which I'm going to do in a moment. I said it's also in Chassidus, in Ayin Beis, in Ayin Hey, Tzav Ayin Hey, which I'll soon cite. It talks about it at length and discusses it and actually reconciles between the two. Anyway, afterwards, that rabbi came over to me very upset. How could I say that? God is complete. And then he suddenly blurts out and he says, the Rebbe also once told me something like that. And he told me that he once wrote an article for the Yiddish Shehem, where rebutting that concept that God needs us, and the Rebbe says wrote all over the page. The Rebbe would edit the Yiddish Shehem in English. Rabbi Chadikov edited in Yiddish. And the Rebbe wrote that you're entering into Bein Harim Gevayim, which means between great mountains, a discussion of Aveda Tzerech Geveya, whether Aveda is needed above, but Geveya Tzerech needs us. And instead of getting into it, better not write about this and write about a different topic. So I asked him if he still has the Rebbe's note. He says, I didn't save it, but I remember it vividly. And I still don't understand till today what the Rebbe wanted. So I told him, look, one thing is for sure, I feel good that I'm on the Rebbe's side here, and I feel the same, what I said was based on, even though I didn't know about the tzedek. So this topic is a topic, but let's address it from the way it should be addressed, which is sources. Just to talk about God needs us, God needs us, how do we know? So everything is in Torah. So let's begin from the sources. Where's the first place Aveda Tzedek Geveya? I looked and researched. The first source is a Ramban. And Tetzaveh, we read a few chapters, Chavtes Memvov, and Rabbeinu B'chaye. The Ramban is the earliest source that I was able to find. Maybe there's more. And he makes it very clear, Aveda Tzedek Geveya, not just Tzedek Chedyot. In other words, it's not just V'shachanti B'seichem. He talks about the Eibishter Shechina. It's not just for us that God rests among us for our benefit, but it also has a benefit to God. That's what he says. Rabbeinu B'chai elaborates. Then we come Mareches. There's a sefer called Mareches El Lakus from Rab Peretz ben Rab Yitzchak Akayan. The Rebbe actually has a letter in Iglis Kodesh. I think it's in volume 2. I don't remember what page. Maybe page 41. It's the Rabbi Avram Hechtel of Hashalom, where he asks about the Mareches El Lakus and the Pirush HaChayit on the Mareches. So this was the Mareches El Lakus was lived in the 14th century. So he's a little. The Rebbe writes in his Mana Ramban, but it's right after the Ramban. And he was a teacher of the Ran and the Rivash. So we're talking about, of course, great men. And the Pirush HaChayit, which is Rabbi Yehuda Chaim ben Rabbi Yaakov, on Mareches El Lakus. Chassidus brings Mareches, as the Rebbe brings in that letter, especially around the opinions about the Spheris, whether it's the energies or it's the containers and so on. Then Avedus HaKedesh from Rab Meir ibn Gabbai, the classic from the 15th century, in his introduction, and Shara Aveda chapter 3. And all of this is cited and explained at length by the Shalah, none other than the Shalah and Shar HaGadol. This is a discussion, and they bring, especially Avedus HaKedesh, and cited by the Shalah, both sides. That on one hand, there are many verses that seem to suggest God needs us and God is affected by us. Then you have the Mamar Chazal, Ma ichpas lei, im tzedakta ma titan lei. What does he care? Whether you shech this way or that way. And if you do good, what does it add to him? Because God is shleimus dekula, he's the complete, and doesn't need anything. And it's l'tzarefes abriyas, the whole mitzvahs, l'kol mitzvahs le'nitna l'tzarefes abriyas, in order to refine us, to bind us, to connect us. So you have these contradictions. Avedus HaKedesh writes, and I'm citing straight from Avedus HaKedesh in Perek Gimel. How does he reconcile it? He says the following words. So I'm quoting from one of the Maimorim, which I'll soon cite in Chassidus. So he says like this. Ache shehirich v'hichriach, from Maimor Chazal v'oid kam Maimorim, that there's Aveda Tzedek Geveya, and he asks questions from the Pesukim and the Chazal that contradict that, and he explains that what it says, v'chima ichpas lei, hu al odin, that what it says, and that does he care about us? He says, hu al odin yochid sherish hashroshim delay loy ichpas lei klal. When you're talking about odin sherish hashroshim, it's like atzmos in the language of Chassidus. Al zeis hakavana bo kol apsukim ahem gamkein. In other words, there in sherish hashroshim, the odin, because the odin yochid sherish kol hashroshim, there it's not ichpas. It doesn't affect. It doesn't in any way touch him. Omnam the tzedek hakovid, but the kvedesh shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as his language, lashpi al haroshim el yenim. Chassidus explains what all this means. I'll soon give you the sources. Liyachid reisha machshavas b'seifa. There he uses these words. There. Liyachid reisha machshavas b'seifa. I'm just reading. There it does affect. Ki kein hoya harotzen hatoyer v'achefetz hakodesh. Seirach gomer hu. Seirach gomer, not just need, absolute, total necessity. And the way the Shalah explains it is that the Avedus HaKedesh is basically saying that Natzilus, and Natzilus is absolutely Avedus Tzedek Geveya. Higher than Natzilus, it's not. And he brings there from the Chayat and other commentaries who say you can't say even on Atzilus, you have to say it on lower levels. So number one is there's this discussion, and I just gave the sources. Now comes Chassidus. And here you'll see the Chiddush of Chassidus in a subject beyond what all these Mukubalim say that I just cited. What does Chassidus say? So you have in several Maimorim, let me begin and just give a few sources. In the Maimon Loitia Mishakela, in Teira from the Alter Rebbe, there he says, Vavadim es Hashem Elokeichem is not for the Eibishter, it's for Mamshech Zayin Havaya into Elokeichem. So drawing down the dimension of the divine that's transcendent into the divine that's within existence. That's in Loitia Mishakela, and cited in other places. In the Maimer Va'ati Yisrael Tovkuf Samach Beis, And same thing you have in Yonim, Maimori Admur Azokan in Yonim page. Do I have the page here? I don't have the page, but it's there. It talks about it. There he goes into a whole thing that the same question he asks. God is complete. What does he need? He says that we're serving like an Eved. An Eved works, does things that the Melech does. Well, it's not his covet to do. So we do it in his place, so to speak. So it's not filling a need. It's more serving the work that the Eibishter would have done, and different levels of avodim, as he explains. Okay. Then in the Maimer Bolok in Likutei Torah, Doloi Hibet Oven, there he adds, and this is the key Chiddush, that the Eibishter Nesava Kodesh Baruch Hu Liyis Le'Dira B'Tachtenim. He desired the Dira B'Tachtenim. He says there, desire has no explanation. In other places we know the Lashon is, the Alter Rebbe says, a Taivan stuck in Kasha. There's no question. He desired, but he desired a Dira B'Tachtenim. So therefore he desired that he should, that this need. So he doesn't need it, but he desired it. And therefore, when we fulfill it, we're fulfilling his desire. So it's not a shleimus. It's not because he's missing something. It's because he desired, and desire doesn't have to have a logical explanation. In Shmois Chelik Beis Likutei Sichos, he explains this somewhat, that it's not mitzad shleimus, it's mitzad desire. But let's take this further, because he doesn't really go spell it out in Maimer Bolok in detail. So we have a series of Maimorim, and we'll start here with number 1, Maimorim of Avadtem es Hashem Elokechem and Kisalve, all in Parsha Mishpatim. We have an Eira Teira Mishpatim page 1600, Aleph Kuf Samach Vav Zayin, that's 1666 and 67. Page 3025. Veschanan page, it's all Eira Teira, 388. And Ba'aleischa page, Eira Teira page 421. And then the same thing is the Maimorim Tofresh Chav Zayin, Tofresh Chav Tes from the Reb Marash. And then there is the Maimorim that come afterwards, which are very critical here. Maimorim of, first of all, Hemshech Ayin Beis, the Maimer Vayikra and Tzav Ayin Hey in volume 2, Tze'eno Reno Tofresh Ayin Zayin, and the Rebbe Chazad that in Tofshin Mem, Seis Teres Ha'ela Tofresh Ayin Ches, and Tofshin Mem, and of course there's like Yitiyah Mishakela, Tofshin Yud Beis, and I believe also B'Shah Sheikdimu Tofshin Yud Beis. All these talk about this Inyan in different details. Also, Alad V'Hoya Ekev Ateres. And is there anything else I want to add here? Let's see, sources wise. In Eira Teira, also page 1000, Mishpatim, page 1219. Okay, so there's a few things that are critical that he says there. He speaks like the Avedis HaKedesh, he quotes Avedis HaKedesh, but then there's a few chidushim that are added in Chassidus and says that even though it's true that mainly in Atzilus is Seder Geveya, that's where there's a need, both not just the Kalim, but also the Eiris. Yet, and higher than Atzilus, there's no need, because God is beyond need there. And yet, I'm going to read a Lashon from Eira Teira Nach. That's what I wanted to add. Eira Teira Nach is also relevant here. Eira Teira Nach, which is on page Tofresh Pei Aleph, 681. Actually, 679 and 681. So he says the following. Which means Atzmus doesn't affect not the positive mitzvahs and not the begam from an aveda, the blemish or the wound that it causes. Since it's negate the shem havaya that radiates not tzilus, it's also kavyochel negate also not tzmusei. Kiven de kula chad, since they're all one. And this is a point made in a number of places. In here, in Ayin Zayin, Senerena, the Rebbe brings it as well. But then there's a few things that I have to add. In Leitia Mishakela, let's start with the Tzav Ayin Hey. Tzav Ayin Hey, on the top of page Tov Tov Kuf Chav Beis, which is 922, he adds, I'm sorry, at the bottom of Tov Tov Kuf Chav Gimel, 923 and 924, he adds, both are true, Ve'enim seisim zelazeh. They don't contradict one another. The ime yesha kavona hapnimius va'atzmis usheyi aveda, because there he explains that there's a level of makif hachitzenius hamakif. That's where leichbus lei. But pnimius hamakif, of course, ichbus lei, because in the Savi, that's what he wants. So he says, even though it's there in the kavon atzmis, makom mokim eina nitfus b'zeh chas v'shalom. He's not nitfus. Nitfus means he's not bound by it. One of the ways you can explain that is because he desires to need. He wants to need, not because he needs. We're nitfus. When we need something, we need it and we're bound to it. Nitfus means he is still removed from it even though he wants it. So it's the way Atzmus, so to speak, experiences something, if you can call it that. That he's not bound by it, and it's not because he's missing something. And on Loitia Meshakela, Tovshin Yud Beis, the Rebbe adds, a Chiddush, he says, Yesh Leimer, that Atzmus wants the Teitzah of Aveda, the result. It's like you do business, the result of the business, but it's not Ichbasle, he doesn't care about the details. It's about the result of it. That's what he adds in Tovshin Yud Beis. Anyway, that is essentially, so bottom line, as Chassidus goes, the Avedis HaKedesh says it's Atzilus, and higher than Atzilus, Leichbas. The Mareches actually, at Elikurs, lowers it even to a lower level. The Chayet is more like the Avedis HaKedesh. This needs to also be reconciled with the Shita of the Mareches, who hold that the Eidus are the Spheres, are the energies, not just the containers like the Shita of the Rakanti. But that's for not right now. I'll try to follow up on that matter. And Chassidus goes the other way around. It goes higher and takes the care and the need that God has all the way to Atzmus. But the key thing to remember, this is not a need as we understand need. At best, it's desire for it, and therefore it connects, and therefore it's negeya there, but negeya that's not nitfus, as he says in Ayin Beis, in Hamshach, in Ayin Hey, Tzav Ayin Hey. I hope this helped clarify, and above all, the most important thing, why mafkamina? What's the difference about all of this? The difference it ends up being is, what is our relationship with Hashem, with God? Because the whole point of Chassidus is that we're not just a relationship of a servant to a master. The relationship goes all the way to the top. That's why it's negeya. So the Mekubalim Rishonim, the early Kabbalists, their way of best explaining it is that we skip Atzmos out of the picture, so to speak. So our relationship is with levels where the divine manifests himself in the Bechina of Adam Elyon, or other ways where he can be a partner with Hashut of LaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the places that are beyond are beyond. Chassidus, however, insists, and maybe because as it goes the generations later, that the relationship is much deeper than that. That's why this is negeya. So lo yichbas is also important to know, because we need to know there's a dimension of the divine that's beyond us. Don't think you are Chavr Lap, and you're a friend of God's, and you're saying, you know what, I need you and you need me. Yes, there's a Chassidic Shemaisis about that and so on. There's a certain element of awe that we have to remember the divine distance from the completely different from us. But that gufa could also have a relationship once you relate to that distance by realizing that Atzmus is not nitfus in this relationship, even though nisava. So it's in a form of nisava, meaning desire, not a logical type of give and take where we give something, God gives us something. That's on lower levels. On higher levels, ultimately, it's the Eina Rechav Elokus, and B'yachadim Zeh, that's what it was nisava. He wanted that his ultimate Atzmus should have in some way a connection with us, but it's not because he needs it, but it's the desire that's higher than need, and that too is a relationship. So that's why it's important to understand both elements, the closeness and the distance, something like Ava and Yira. Ava creates closeness, Yira creates Kabbalah Seil and the awe that's necessary, and ultimately we need both, as I've discussed other times.